this is kind of interesting. Now that we've been doing the podcast for so long, we've been putting out content, especially on YouTube. It's really fun to have interactions with people when they're watching the podcast on YouTube. When somebody listens to a podcast, they don't really communicate with you besides like hopefully leaving a review or something like that. They don't give you feedback about particular interviews that I've done. And when you and I first recorded, our bandwidth was so poor, we didn't even do videos. We just like did an audio only version that we converted into a video later. And a woman had been watching my show. She found your episode in particular. She's from Mexico. She has been dealing with thyroid issues herself. And she said, look, at the end of this episode that we did 3 years ago, you said that you were going to have Elle back on to do an episode all about thyroid. That was 3 years ago, and it's still having an impact today. So it's been great to invite you back, and we can talk about thyroid to help some people out there.
Millions of people, actually, 200 million people across the
Exactly.
world have thyroid problems. 25 plus million Americans are already on some form of thyroid hormone replacement. Often it's the wrong kind. That's another story. But yeah, it's a huge problem. And it'll continue to be. It's literally like it's like getting pregnant. Every day someone's finding that out, and every day someone's finding out they have hypothyroidism. I mean, it's like never ending. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely seems like something that's getting worse over time as well. And just since it's been so long since we've had you on, it would be great to review your kind of history and how thyroid became a passion of yours, because this was not necessarily something that you wanted to do professionally. You were into, screenwriting and doing lots of acting and that kind of thing. So tell us about your journey into health and how this eventually led you to really correct your own thyroid issues yourself.
Yeah, I think like a lot of health authors and people out there, like that classic saying, your test becomes your testimony kind of thing, when you are left in the dust by a bunch of doctors and you have nothing but your own brain, body, and, devices to go figure it out. It's a really lonely place to be. And I think after that, it's something very passionate. You want to go share with the world, particularly when you're like, why couldn't doctors help me? Because that's, I think, the most frustrating part about it. So what I always say, and I'm going to start off and say this to everyone listening, and if you have any friends or you're listening and they have a thyroid problem, please send this to them, is that even if you've been suffering for 10 years, 20 years, it doesn't matter. There's only two reasons why people are suffering. The first one is you're dealing with an uninformed doctor who doesn't understand how to help fix you. What could that look like? They're not testing you correctly. They're not testing you and assessing your labs correctly. They're not testing you, assessing correctly. They may be testing you correctly, assessing you correctly, but then maybe they're not treating you correctly. There's all sorts of stages of which they can fail along this road. And it's because they just weren't taught that in a way. It's just old, outdated 1973 thyroid protocols. And only the ones that are going above and beyond their training, the ones that truly care, and usually those are the ones that aren't involved with insurance companies because they give more than 15 minutes to their patients. And those are the people that are more in the know. But the bottom line is that the best-selling thyroid books have been written by thyroid patients like me because we know how it feels. We know how these hormones feel. We understand how it works, and we understand all of the connections and problems that can come up. So I don't care that you've been suffering for 10 years. You could have gone to the Mayo Clinic. You could have spent $200,000 like someone I know to not get any help. And then I look at the labs from the Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic. They took the right thyroid test. They were all disasters. No one said a thing about the thyroid. No one treated thyroid. She's dead now. So, listen, it's not a joke. You can pour all the money you can in because we think, well, it's the Cleveland Clinic, but it's this doctor who went to Harvard. It really doesn't matter. I could debate Harvard doctors all day long on this topic, and they'd be like, I don't even know what she's saying. Do you know what I mean? Because it's just they're indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking, and it's just old school. So the ones that are in the know are like the functional medicine doctors, the doctors of osteopathic medicine, anti-aging doctors, usually chiropractors are somewhat knowledgeable about this as well, but they can't prescribe. So those are the type of doctors you're looking for. And I have a free thyroid guide. You can just go to freethyroidguide.com. And in there, it gives you like, hey, how to call a doctor's office and kind of try to suss out if they know what they're talking about. Now, it's not foolproof, you know what I mean? But it's enough information because if they do answer questions in a certain way, you can go, oh, F this one. Fuck that. I'm not going to that dumbass. And you can just hang up the phone. It doesn't mean you're not going to waste appointment. But what I went through was like, even though I had good insurance at the time, I busted through all the copays. Like I kept wasting money just showing up at offices without pre-screening, calling the nurse, asking a couple questions. So that's all in my free thyroid guide as well, and the list of tests to get and all the stuff. So I know that's a lot to start off with, but at the end of the day, no one could help me. I live in Los Angeles. I went to over 24 endocrinologists and experts, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I finally took things into my own hands. At the time, there were no podcasts. There was no internet, like no one was having social media. And so I didn't really have a lot of resources. And I had to figure this out on my own and dose myself with thyroid hormones on my own that I had to order from another country. Like, what are we doing? I don't live in a third world country. I'm in the United States. Like, what's happening? And I'm ordering from Mexico and, other places. And I had to dose myself back. I literally doctored myself back to health. And it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. But as a result, I'm an expert. So, I mean, okay, well, and then I just couldn't stop shouting it from the rooftops, and everyone and their mother showed up in my life with thyroid problems. And then, the rest is history.
Yeah. Okay. So this is maybe very obvious, but one question I have is why aren't doctors taught this? I believe you referred to them in the past as dumb doctors, affectionately, of course. No disrespect to any of the doctors out there.
No,
It's a system. Yeah, it's just a system that they're in. But what is it about thyroid specifically that they just are not given the proper education? They weren't given the proper education to help you.
Well, because I guess the medical community would have to catch on in a large way in order to change what's in the textbooks. So the way that they teach about thyroid, look, even my own doctor, the doctor on my book, Dr. Gary Forsman, who knows what I know, and he vouches for me. That's why I have him on the book. He will say, he goes, look, I was probably hurting patients by treating them the wrong way. I didn't know better either, because we weren't taught. We were taught that this is the thing you look at, and this is the thing you dose with, and this is all you look at. So when he kept having patients coming to him complaining, even though they were on thyroid hormone, and he was like, well, why isn't this working? I mean, the books are just telling me to keep right. He had to do what I did, which was like, let me geek out on this and take an extra look. Now, God bless him. Thank God he did. That's a functional medicine doctor who's not associated with insurance companies, who has the time and the fortitude and the wherewithal to be able to do this. And he went, he figured it out. And then he was like, oh my God, I didn't know I was doing this wrong. So he's able to fall on his sword on that. Then you have him in the back of my book, Q&A with Dr. Forsman. He tells a story about how a patient came to Dr. Forsman, and Dr. Forsman wanted them to get some extra tests. And so he ordered these extra tests, and apparently her endocrinologist was offended. Like, how dare this other doctor? Like, I'm an expert. Like, how dare someone come in here? Now, I just want everyone listening to kind of think about that. Like, where's the patient in this? What is it, like ego? Like, what are we in a fucking cockfighting? What are we doing here? Like, it's just, but because the endocrinologist probably didn't know what the tests were that Dr. Forsman was asking, he was probably just too embarrassed to admit that he didn't know. So, ego comes into this, and also it's an indoctrination to some degree. I mean, Dr. Forsman will tell you that. He will say it's being indoctrinated. So the doctor's thinking, I spent all the money, I learned everything I know, and I went to Harvard, I spent 10 years. How can I not know? And then someone comes along, and it's like, my doctor said, it's like asking a rabbi to do Hail Marys. It's just, they're like, that's not even in you ask them about T3 and they'll be like, it doesn't matter. Like, again, they just have to look outside the box. Thank God Dr. Forsman did, and he did because patients were complaining. But what happens now is the ego uninformed doc, not the uninformed doc like Gary used to be, right? Like, he used to be the doc that was like, oh, I think I am uninformed. Maybe I should figure this out. These guys, they just keep going. And so what happens is that they'll put someone on thyroid medication. It's not the right type. It's not the right dose. It's not the right whatever. And then the person's still having symptoms. And so the doctor's chalking it up to other things. They're going, oh, well, you have depression. Well, we'll give you some Prozac. Oh, yeah. And it's all related to the thyroid. So this happens over and over again. It's endless. It's endless every day in my inbox, emails. My endocrinologist said this. They said I don't have a problem. They said this. And they're always wrong.
Wow.
They're always wrong. And they shouldn't be. And I shouldn't know better than a doctor.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was reading Dr. Ken Berry's testimonial about your book, where he's like, Elle is not a doctor, but ironically, she knows more than 95% of doctors about this topic. This isn't what you set out to do. You didn't one day wake up and think like, oh, I'm going to go learn about thyroid and be a thyroid coach to all the doctors. It's like you were put in that position and you had to go out there and learn. And so, yeah, I have so much respect for doctors like Dr. Forsman for going out and yourself. And, you know, some of these doctors are realizing, yes, I'm misinformed or uninformed, so let me get some different information. That would be very intimidating. And yeah, if I had a doctor's degree, I'd probably do the same thing and say like, well, I, you know, paid for all this education. I'm the smartest guy out there. I've got the white lab coat. I don't need to go learn anything else from actresses, you know?
Right. From some nobody with like a philosophy degree, like what's she good for? Basket weaving? I mean, that's literally like probably the opinion. And I had this happen to me recently. So I don't deal with my regular insurance doctor for anything that's important. You know what I mean? I call Dr. Forsman for, you know, HRT, or if I had wanted to, he prescribes me my thyroid. Like I just don't rely on dumb doctors for this stuff anymore. But I still go into the insurance doctor for like the mammogram, the thing, you know, you get your blood work, whatever. Okay. So I go into a new one recently. And I knew, I mean, you think I would know after all these years of having horrible experience with doctors. I go in there, her bedside manner was fucking disaster. Okay, like this needs to change right off the bat. No one's even looking at you, talk to you. They literally are just like, what the fuck do you want? I know everything, and who do you think you are, right? So this was brutal. I bring in my book. I'm always transparent. I'm like, hey, I'm actually a thyroid expert, and you're going to look at my labs and you might be confused, but I'm happy to explain it to you. And I'm also happy to teach you if you want to learn and you're not, something I say is confusing to you. I go in there, the book, the whole thing. She sees my thyroid labs. And again, I don't need a prescription from her, so I don't care what she thinks. We go through the whole thing, and then they send me an email and they're like, your thyroid looks really high, which by the way, it really doesn't. And she's like, we think that maybe you're, and I just was like, boy, when are, she couldn't have said, hey, I saw your book and I'm confused about your thyroid. Instead, I said, and she goes, then she wrote, but that's not really my area. It should be every doctor's area. If I can do it, every single MD should be able to fix everyone's thyroid problem. This shit is not complicated. It's not complicated.